Hi, how's everyone out there doing? This is Amy Hamilton, continuing our journey today, 24 authors and 12 hours. This is a marathon international virtual book festival, and I am super happy to be here with Jodie Hopkins. And I am the author of The Project Manager and The Consummate Communicator. They are available for Amazon, download free all day on Kindle, so please check them out. I also have other versions. We'll be talking about this a bit later. But I really want to talk about Jodie and her book, and her book is Journey for One, and she talks about how you can travel solo. It's very exciting. And you might be thinking, Amy, you are crazy. It's like COVID, and I am not going anywhere, let alone anywhere alone, right? But you know what? Jodie's also going to talk about how you can plan your trips, and she's going to talk about different things that you can do so that when we are able to travel again, you're going to have your travel itineraries ready. You're going to have that bucket list ready to go and check off. So, Jodie, can you share with us a little bit about your book?
Sure. My book is not your typical travel book. It is a book that I wrote because of what I experienced. I had an opportunity to go travel for business, first of all, and had never gone anywhere by myself. And so was scared to death and decided I better get ready for this. And over the years, I had the opportunity to travel, and I've now been to 42 countries. And the book doesn't tell you where to go. It doesn't tell you where to stay or what the best restaurants are. It's a way that if you've never started out on a trip by yourself, that it gives you an opportunity to work through all the fears and all the concerns and all the what ifs prior to ever leaving. And so you work through a plan, you try different things, you go different places, like trying to stay in a hotel alone and eat at a restaurant alone and go to a movie alone first before you try traveling. So it's a workbook kind of a thing, and you get to write and make little charts and make choices and have fun. And it's a kind of laugh at yourself kind of thing, and learn from stories of people who've been there, done that.
I
So,
think those are some really great points. And one of the things during COVID, and you're really highlighting, is alone doesn't mean you have to be lonely.
oh,
And there's two very, very distinct things there.
mhm.
And so a lot of people are sort of like, why would you travel alone? And could you talk about why did you make that choice? Because that's a very bold choice.
It is a bold choice, and I know that it's not one that many people make. But I also know that the statistics show that it's just growing by leaps and bounds, and people are finding out that it isn't as bad as it seems. And our society is also coming up with new and different ways for people to travel alone without being lonely. And I think that, first of all, I by nature am a real introvert. I recharge by being alone. But to go out in society, where society says one is the loneliest number, and all these sad songs about being by yourself, and I found that it forced me into a situation where I would make conversation with strangers, and I would seek out companionship. If I was sitting in a coffee shop watching people and saw somebody sitting alone, I'd strike up a conversation and find out amazing things that I didn't know before. So I think that there's a saying about everybody should try it at least once in your life so you can find out how strong you really are. So I think it's not for everybody. Just, I don't play tennis, and I'd hate for somebody to force me into playing tennis. But I enjoy traveling alone, and it's something that I think you learn to love, and that I think it's something anybody that wants to can.
I think it's really interesting. I've traveled alone and I've traveled in groups, and I have definitely found that sometimes traveling in groups can also be pretty miserable
Mhm.
because now you have so many different competing interests. And the first time I started traveling alone, I was nervous. I mean, I think that you go into this point like where your society says, no, don't go out alone. You're not supposed to be alone. And the more I traveled alone, though, the more I was like, I really enjoy this because now I can be mindful when I'm traveling. I can do the things that I want to do when I travel. And I do have a confession, though, that when I said I traveled alone, I did have my number one companion with me on many of my trips, and that's my little dog, Sugar. And he sits in the seat in front of you on a plane. He has 23 stamps in his passport. So he's a very well-traveled dog, and he has all these little pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower and things. And what I found in Europe especially is it was great because you could just get like a little passport for him and he could travel all over, and basically his passport has his photo and all his shot records and vet information. So it was a really fun time. Now, Jodie, as you're planning travel, and we all have these great dreams now and we can start thinking about our trips, what advice do you have for somebody who's planning a trip for once we come out of this COVID lockdown?
Well, I think that's one of the great things about my book is that it was made for COVID, because it gives you time and the resources to be able to say, okay, where would I really like to go? What do I really want to do? What are the things I want to see? What are the things I don't want to see? It's, if you've ever been on one of those 35 countries in 36 days kind of tours, you find out that you get to that stage of ABC, another bloody cathedral, and there are things you want to do and things you don't. When you're by yourself, you get to do just the things you want to. And I think that going through the book now, when you're not traveling and you can't go anywhere really, gives you that time to really sit and think and plan and research, because I think that's half of the fun of it for me, is planning and really dreaming big and going outside the box and saying, I like art and I went to this one art museum, but maybe when I'm in Paris, I should go to the Louvre, and really think big, and you don't have to limit yourself, and find out how doable things really are. So I think that while it's not safe to travel a whole lot right now, I think a day will come when it will be. And I think that you'll be able to, if you've used the book and done some of this pre-planning, you'll be able to jump once things open up again and get the really good prices on the trips and get really good plane fares and those kinds of things, because people won't be ready. And so I think it makes you mentally ready, but it also makes you financially and socially ready. And so it's a good time for it.
So you bring up some really interesting things about, I want to call them like starter solo, if you will, like Journey for One, like how do you go out and how do you approach in your local neighborhood or a day trip or something? So can you describe that a little bit more on what you're talking about on this kind of like practice runs, if you will?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I did was when I first found out I was going to go on, I was going all the way to St. Louis from Denver, and for this business conference. And I thought, you know what, I've got to practice these things. So I'd been to McDonald's in the drive-thru and with friends 1,000 times, but I'd never been by myself inside. So it was like, okay, I'm a teacher, 40 years teaching. So I knew that there was a process. I had to start out small, get bigger, make it get tougher. So I started out going to McDonald's by myself and finding out that, there are other people that are here that are by themselves. And then it was, well, maybe I'm going to go to a movie by myself. And I thought, this is going to be miserable. It's the best place to be by yourself because you're in the dark. Nobody else really sees you. And the focus needs to be on, are you having a good time? Are you enjoying what you're doing? Not on what everybody else thinks. Because honestly, nobody else is looking at you and nobody else is thinking of you. And so I had a really interesting thing happen the first time I stayed in a hotel by myself. That was like the final exam before my trip. And I went into the registration, the reception desk, and said, Jodie Hopkins, I'm here for tonight. And the lady looked at me and she said, is it just going to be you? And I was like, okay, here we go. This is that moment when they look at you like, loser, what's wrong with you? You can't get anybody to travel with you. And I said, yeah, it'll be just me. And she said, oh, I'm so jealous. I wish I could have a night just for me, just for myself. So you find out that you really are not the freak of nature that you think you are, but that people really do envy that, and do, especially working moms. And, I find that a lot of people who are interested in my book are people who have just retired or just find themselves single for the first time in a long time, and really like the idea of being alone and enjoy their solo time, but just need to have some practice. So it's not like I ask you to get on a plane and go to Cambodia as your first journey. In fact, I discourage that. a lot of people get online to these websites and say, or Facebook groups and say, well, I'm getting ready to leave on my first trip alone and I'm going to Bali for 3 weeks. And that's lovely. I would love to go to Bali, but I wouldn't recommend someplace where you don't speak the language, don't know the culture, don't know the food, don't know the weather, all of that. I don't recommend that as a place to start. I started out in Estes Park, Colorado, which is about an hour's drive from where I live in Denver. And I figured that way I go, it's someplace I know I like. I've been there before, so it's not totally foreign, but it's close enough that if I get really uncomfortable, I can just drive home and there's no harm done. So I think that there is a natural progression of how you learn to do this, how you get used to it. And it's kind of fun, especially if you have somebody else in your life that traveled solo, so that you can kind of compare notes and say, oh my gosh, then I did this and then I thought that. And it gives you some courage and gives some encouragement that you're not alone, even though, especially in this age of technology, that you're not alone. And I can be in a group of 10 people and be the loneliest I've ever been. It's being alone and being lonely are two very different things.
Now, you bring up some really great points. And I know that sometimes it's interesting. I'm a big E extrovert most of the time. And people are like, oh, well, you love people. I'm like, I do. But also as an author and everything, there's times when you need that solitude. And there's times like when you need to like have that reflection time. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I first started going out to places like a coffee house by myself, I always felt like, oh, I need to have a book. I need to have something like my shield. And it came to a point where I feel now like I can go and I love the people watching. And you mentioned that aspect of this, like where you people watch and then you do this thing that, oh my gosh, it's so scary. You dialogue with strangers. Can you share that a little bit, like what your experiences have been, like just meeting people as you're solo traveling?
I had a really interesting conversation one time. I was in, I don't remember, I think it was in France. And I had lived in Austria I got the opportunity to live in Austria for 12 years and was there by myself teaching at an American school. Absolutely loved it. And because things are so accessible in Europe, it's easy to travel and go places. So I would go to, I'd hop on the train and go to Paris for the weekend. And it was not that big a deal. And so, I mean, it was a big deal to me, but in terms of planning or expense, it wasn't that big a deal. And so I was sitting in front of this church one day and this man was sitting there and I heard him talking to somebody and he heard the American accent. So I commented, oh, you must be from the US. I'm from the US also, blah, blah, blah. So we got started talking and he was the grumpiest looking guy in the world. And I decided that my goal for that day was to make this man smile. So I started chatting with him and asked him about what he did for a living. And, oh, I'm retired. I said, well, what did you do before? He said, no, I'm not going to tell you. Everybody laughs at me. I said, I promise I won't laugh much. And so I started chatting with him and come to find out he's the man that worked for, I believe it was 3M. And he was the man who invented the condom. Well, what a moment in life to have a conversation with that guy. And I've met people who were, little old ladies living alone in a village in Bolivia. I've talked to the man who's the Pope of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. And I've had opportunities to meet people I never would have and information that I never would have known. And it's been such a joy and such a highlight for my life. It's, for me, it's the stories you tell when you get home that are your scrapbook. And that, you don't ever say the things about, oh, well, the plane was on time, the food was wonderful, the mattress was perfect, and the taxi came right at the right time to take me back to the airport. That's not what you tell. You tell about, oh my gosh, I missed the taxi, I couldn't find him. We went to this restaurant and I didn't know how to say any of it, so I just pointed and got chicken gizzards. And I mean, those are the stories you tell. And so you don't get those unless you venture out a little bit. There is some courage and some bravery that goes into it. But it's also a self-fulfilling kind of thing that if you take that risk and you take that chance, you get what you look for. If I used to do this training with people and I would say, okay, I want you to look around the room and tell me all the red things you see. Count as many red things as you can see. Give them 1 minute. After the end of 1 minute, they'd come back and I'd say, okay, how many blue things did you see? And they'd look at me and they'd say, well, that's not what you told us to look for. That's not what we found. I said, I know, but I didn't say you couldn't look for the blue ones. So it's a matter of what do you look for? If you go out looking for people that are interesting, if you go out looking for things you've never seen before, if you go looking for a good time, then that's what you're going to have. If you're sitting in your hotel room saying, this is miserable, I'm miserable, I hate this, this is, then that's the time you're going to have. So,
You touched on two things there. And the first one, I was smiling and laughing because it resonates with me. And I've done some articles about this before and some speeches, which is I'm like, good days make boring stories, right? Like you said, I mean, oh, I got up this morning and everything went great. And my coffee's sitting right here. Yay. Oh no, this morning, first speaker could not hear me. And we had to figure out how to chat through the interview. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this how my day is going to be? Right. And so those moments, those are the moments that make these stories, these moments that are a little bit awkward, these moments that are a little bit like, what are you going to do and how do you deal with it? The other thing that you talked about, and it's just kind of been such a theme, and I think generally you're a pretty positive person with a good outlook to write a book. So far, every author has touched on this concept of it's your perception. It's how you treat things. Are you going to be like, I have to go on this business trip and I'm just going to sit up here, hunkered down and not talk to people? Or am I going to go on this business trip and be like, hey, I'm going to check out St. Louis. I'm going to take some selfies in front of the arch. You have touched on so many amazing things. We're about midway through the session. One of the things I do want to promote is the concept of free. So once again, awesome giveaways for you guys who are out there. So right now, my two books, The Project Manager, Life is a Project, and The Consummate Communicator, Character Traits of True Professionals. You can go to Amazon right now and you can get the Kindle versions free. Please just check them out. And they are super easy reads. They are business fables. So people are kind of like, what does that mean? It means it's both a teaching story with a few nuggets, and they're just kind of fun little reads that you'll get some information. And then I am here with Jodie Hopkins, who wrote Journey for One. I'm still working on exactly the placement, and then you get the little shine, so I apologize.
No
and Jodie has been talking with us about this amazing concept of solo travel, and just so inspiring. So Jodie, when do you think it was that you started doing your first solo travel trips?
I was really lucky. I grew up in a family that traveling was our life. We were, my parents both worked, and that was in a day when not every mom worked. And so we had a little more disposable income, I suppose, than many. And we would go camping and we would go visit relatives. And it got to the point when I was in middle school that we were going to Mexico every single Christmas, and we were driving to British Columbia to go salmon fishing every fall. So I got to do those things. Well, then I got into, I think it was 9th grade, and the Spanish teacher I had that I adored was sponsoring a trip for kids to go to Mexico and live with a family and study. And it was like, me. And so my solo started out really early in terms of going with a group, but not with my family. And I think that's the other thing that I learned in doing this book, was that traveling solo doesn't mean you're by yourself. It just means you're left to your own decisions and your own devices. So I can go on a solo trip and be part of a group travel, which right now they're doing a lot more female-only travels. They're doing a lot of 55 and over travels, those kinds of things. But I started doing those things, going to Mexico with my teacher. Then as I got into college, I started doing the same thing. I was a Spanish minor, and so I wanted to learn all the Spanish I could, spent lots of time there. And then it was for business that first time my boss said to me, you're going to St. Louis for a conference, that I was like, okay. And I made sure that while I was there, you make of it what you want to. Like you said, you can sit in the bed and go, well, now what? But I decided that, okay, I'm in St. Louis. I'm going to not sit in my room. I want to go see things. So I had little mishaps and got lost, and that's half the fun. And I think part of what I do in the book is go through this idea of think about before you go, what's the worst possible case scenario? Well, I get lost and nobody speaks English. Well, fine. So you write down, you take a card or you write down the name of your hotel. You make sure you pack an extra $30, $40 in your wallet, and you go out, and worst case scenario, you get a taxi and you hand them the card and you go home. And those are the things that, learning to travel alone. Are there times I didn't like it? Of course. There were trips that, in hindsight, I would never do alone again. One of them was India, and that's not because it was bad or that I didn't enjoy it or I felt unsafe. It was because it was so incredible and everything was so magical, and everything is just more in India. It's more crowded, it's more colorful, it's more hot, it's more unbelievable than anywhere else I've ever been. And I got lonely because I missed having somebody there to go, oh my gosh, did you see that 5 people on a motorcycle? And those kinds of things, to be able to have those reality checks or be in amazement about something. But other than that, I think there are some trips that I don't want to do alone. And it's mostly, again, because it's the sharing that is also part of the fun. I would never recommend every single trip you ever go on be solo. But
you bring up a great point of that balance between sometimes we want to be connected to a greater group and sometimes we really want to be alone. Mm-hmm. And you also hit on a great concept about safety when you travel. So I think one of the things that's super important, especially for international travel, is that you're aware of insurance requirements when you travel, you're aware of shots when you travel, and you have some way, like you said, where if you do, God forbid, end up in a hospital or something, that there's ways to get connected. Do you talk about that at all in your books?
I do. In fact, one of the longest chapters in the book is about between the medical chapter and the safety chapter. Those are the 2 longest ones. And one of the things that became apparent really quickly was, in this technological age, there's no reason for anybody to feel alone. And one of the most kind of moments that I had was I'm in Bolivia and I have my cell phone. It may cost me a lot, but I can call my doctor in Denver. I can call him and say, I'm having this problem. What do I do? The other thing I learned is that everywhere I've ever been in the world, there was somebody somewhere that spoke English. And people, for the most part, are very happy to help you. They're happy to help you out and happy to make it better for you. And I think too that the safety and the medical thing, you make wise choices. You don't. I get scared for people because I see things in the newspaper or read them on Facebook posts or whatever about young ladies going out at night drinking and trying to pick up men in a big city like Mexico City all by themselves. And I think, I wouldn't go to downtown Denver to a strange neighborhood, a dark neighborhood by myself, and I speak the language and it's my hometown. I wouldn't ever dream of doing that. So I think being safety conscious and having some foresight about what's going to be smart and what's not, and always being aware of your surroundings, I think is important. And I also do a lot about talking to people at the hotel. They have an interest in keeping you safe, because if you're not safe at their hotel, it reflects badly on them. So you go to them and you say, one of my things is that I spent some time in Portugal, in Lisbon, right before I moved back to the States. And I wanted to go to a fado show, which is kind of like flamenco. And there was this one, but I didn't know anything about the neighborhood. I knew I could take a taxi. I knew I could take a taxi home. So I looked, they said, oh yeah, that's lots of tourist area around there. There'll be lots of things there. No worries. So I took the taxi. I get there, I go to the show. I come out of the show thinking, okay, there's probably taxis lined up here to take people home from the shows. Not a taxi in sight, not a tourist in sight. It was dark. It was probably 10 o'clock at night. And I frankly got kind of scared, because it was like I knew I was too far to walk back to the hotel. Wasn't sure. I thought, I know, I'm going to go in one of these places and I'm going to have them call a taxi for me. Well, I went in. It was another fado club, and I told the guy, we were just chatting, I told him what I was doing there. And he said, would you like to see somebody do it? He said, we have a group of friends here that are fado dancers. They're doing it. Would you like to see it? I ended up sitting the whole night till like 3 a.m. with this group of fado dancers, drinking the local whatever it was, and having the time of my life. And then they called the taxi and I went home. So, it's about being smart and about thinking through things a little bit before you get in the situation.
So you balanced two amazing concepts right there, Jodie. One of which is be smart and be safe, but the other one is be open to opportunities, which is what you're talking about. So many times it's like we're like, this is my plan, and then when that plan doesn't happen, we're like, well, there's no other option. And people look at me as the project manager, and I do talk about planning, but then people forget the execution phase, and I talk about it. Life is what happens when you're planning other things.
Mm-hmm.
And that quote is just so powerful because we have to have that balance between this is my plan, I'm going to do this, and this taxi cab is going to be waiting, but now I'm going to hang out with these fado dancers all night. Okay, cool. Exactly. And it's really that kind of like, that goes back into that tremendous story you have that you're going to come back and tell your friends. Mm-hmm. So we are getting towards the end of the session. And as we're getting ready to wrap up, is there any last points and words of wisdom on solo travel that you want to share that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, there's just one about why this became important to me and why having adventures is so important to me. When I was just a little tiny baby, my mother went to Kansas to visit her grandmother in the nursing home. And Grandma had been a farmer's wife and, struggled all her whole life and was in the room with the banker's wife. So great grandma said, Joanne, I'm richer than Mrs. Jones. And my mom thought, Grandma's losing it. And she says, oh, no, I know she's got more money in the bank than I do, but my scrapbooks are thicker. And to me, that became my mantra for life. That was, and I have a thing that somebody made for me that says, she with the thickest scrapbook wins. And that's what it is for me. It's about whether I'm sitting in my own living room or I'm walking down the street and meet a neighbor. It's about having experiences and about having fond memories and about doing the things you always wished you could do. So someday you can sit and look at your thick scrapbooks and not have one single regret in life about what you didn't do.
Jodie, that is so powerful. And it really kind of ties it up that you read Journey for One and you might go, oh, Journey for One, this is one of these books that's about being alone and being lonely. But instead you realize that sometimes our greatest connections are when we're just out alone and we're letting life happen. Mm-hmm. And we're just open to experience.
Well, and the book every chapter has a story in it about some real life thing that happened to somebody while they were traveling solo. Most of the time they're good things that happen. And I think that it also is done. I have a sense of humor and I couldn't write a book without it. So it's fun, it's silly, it's uplifting, it's encouraging. And my hope is that somebody somewhere reads the book and says, you know what, I can do this.
Jodie, I really appreciate your time today so much for connecting with me. Thanks to you for being part of 24 Authors in 12 Hours. Certainly. I unfortunately have to run because, as you're aware, this is a entirely packed day. Exactly. So if you want, Jodie's book is available on Amazon. And anything else you want to add?
The Kindle version of my book is available for free today, Friday, and Saturday.
So today, Friday, and Saturday, pick up Journey for One on Kindle.
Kindle version, absolutely free, my treat.
Great.